Okay, thank you everyone for coming. You are all welcome. And thank you, Mr. Shoaib Bhat, for giving us the presentation today. It's lovely of you to give us your time. Now, during this meeting, we're so lucky to have Mr. Shoaib Bhat to give us this presentation. He's going to talk about Ibn Arabi, a general introduction to his metaphysics, Wahdat al-Wujood and Wahdat al-Shuhood, comparison and differences. This discussion will focus primarily on the overview of Ibn Arabi's philosophy, the concept of Wahdat al-Wujud and Wahdat al-Shuhud, and the efforts that Shah Waliullah to reconcile these concepts with specific reference to his Lamahat. Now, Mr. Shoaib Bhat has given us a talk about this topic on the 2nd of March this year, but he was very thorough, and we feel like there is a lot more. And he also said there is a lot more to say, but we stopped him halfway because it took a while, and he accepted to come and give us the part 2 of this talk today. So we are most thankful for that. I'll just say a couple of words about Shoaib. Shoaib has an MBA and completed his civil services exam in 2012. He currently works with the Government of J&K as the Chief Financial Officer in the Anti-Corruption Bureau. His areas of interest are literature, philosophy, religion, and mysticism. So thank you again, Shoaib, for joining. Please go ahead and start your talk.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Subhanallah al-Ali al-Azim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah. I feel much privileged to be sitting here in front of you virtually, of course, and be able to share, although I would not say this is a formal talk, I am too, insignificant for that. But I can just share my something from my journey. And I believe this platform, what makes this platform even more beautiful is that this space is very open. It's not very formalized space, very restrictive space. And I think that makes it even more easier. I have not been all my life, just a second. All my life, I have been trying to read. I never entered into any public space. I have been trying to learn all of my life. So when Frank asked me, it was quite a serendipity that one Sunday, I just logged in to expect some guest to deliver lecture, and there was Noor, Mark, and Frank, who were informally talking to each other, and I just joined, and there was nobody. And then in an informal talk, Frank was kind enough to ask me to share something from my journey. Now, coming directly to the topic is to talk about Ibn Arabi is always going to be difficult for anybody. I mean, you can't talk about titans and colossuses just like it's a cakewalk, because every big thinker who involves sophistication to any degree is complex and involves a lot of thought processes generally. When I'm talking about thinkers, I mean rational thinkers. But what makes dealing with Ibn Arabi and trying to articulate what his thought and philosophy is all about is even more difficult, because it involves another dimension also. He is a kind of a figure from history who has the best of the both worlds. As an articulator of a metaphysics, Islamic metaphysics, he is par excellence. There is nobody in the history of whole Islamic metaphysics who can match Ibn Arabi. That is for sure. This is beyond doubt. How he systematized the whole thought also, and also as a practitioner of Irfan, the Islamic mysticism, Ibn Arabi also stands apart. So to talk about him is always going to be difficult. And what makes things even more complex is that ideas are never born out of, or practices are never born out of isolation. They are always born in certain context. And that context somehow molds the discourse that is going to take place. For instance, a simple example, if you look at one of the greatest Judaic philosopher theologians, Rambam, Moshe bin Maimon, one of the most amazing people, theologians one can come across. His whole work, when you look at his Guide for Perplexed, which is one of the most fundamental tenets in modern Judaism, one of the most fundamental books in modern Judaism, it can be only understood in the Andalusian intellectual atmosphere in which Rambam was placed. So similarly is the same cases with Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi is situated historically in a period which is being informed by certain currents, intellectual, spiritual, and more so literary currents in which he finds himself. And then what he does is he articulates a system, and at the same time, what happens in any form of intellectual discourse is responds to the prevailing situation. So in order to talk about Ibn Arabi for somebody like me, I'll find it very difficult always, because his sophistication is such that it becomes very necessary actually to talk about the context in which Ibn Arabi is situated intellectually and spiritually. And that is why my last conversation, although it was more like a talk, and it was the first time I was speaking publicly like that. I had very little experience of doing that. And then I learned from it, and I realized that I have to be more systematic. And now, while going through my notes, again, I realized that it is very important to fundamentally start somewhere. I cannot just jump directly into a conversation about Ibn Arabi, because it involves a lot of not just sophistication that I was talking about, but also how Ibn Arabi employs terminology. His terminology is very unique. Like I also talked about it last time, he borrows terminology from various schools, primarily from Falsafa and from Islamic peripatetic philosophers. Uh, that terminology seems to be almost synonymous between him and Avicenna. But then how Ibn Arabi employs those terms is a quite different tale altogether. He remolds those terms to his own. For instance, about Wujood, which we will come to talk about in this conversation. He, although the discussions about Wujood have been already present in Islamic theology, and more specifically in certain schools of, let us suppose in Suharwardi, it is present, and then Ibn Sina also. But then what Ibn Arabi does with this idea of Wujood is completely different thing altogether. So where we start is, what is the aim of fundamentally of Islamic discourse? What generally in theology it is called, what are the usul ad-deen and maqasid ad-deen? What are the objectives of the revealed religion, and what are the principles of it? And theologians have dealt with it over a period of time, and we have had brilliant theologians dealing with it just right from the beginning. But when we actually move post Umayyad period, when Umayyads, who were the first monarchical government technically, although this is contestable how I am employing, how I am articulating it. In my opinion, they were the first monarchical Muslim rulers. Post Umayyad saw mushroom growth of people who actually institutionalized a kind of an idea that dealt primarily with batin, that is the inner. And this batin is not directly talked about in scripture, but it is hinted at in scripture. And these groups actually, if there are various approaches to them, but one of the approach that I personally like is by this Turkish scholar called Ahmad Karam Mustafa. Karam Mustafa says that there were disparate tendencies, And around that, certain tendencies were Ahl al-Mahabbah, people of the love. And he kind of uses the symbol of Rabia al-Adawiya, Rabia Basri, says that they were the people of love. And then there were certain Zahidun, people who were ascetics, who had ascetic tendency. And then there were early group which were in Khurasan, which was Malamatiya, people of blame. And later on, these groups kind of converged under an umbrella head of Sufism. That's how he reads it, not an exclusive reading, but although it lends itself a newer understanding. So the focus of particularly in Islamic discourse in general and esoteric discourse, the people of Batin in specific was Tazkiyatun Nafs. Now, Quran repeatedly talks about a category of people which it kind of talks about in terms of that they are the special people. That if there is difference between men, it is humans, it's just because on the basis of what we called taqwa. Taqwa has been variously translated. Some people have translated it as fear of God. Some people have it, but I see it primarily as God consciousness. Taqwa is, for me, how I understand is God consciousness. And when Sufis kind of operational actualized this principle of taqwa, they saw it as tazkiyatul nafs, which means purification of soul, and tasfiyatul qalb, illumination of heart. And what tazkiyatul nafs and tasfiyatul qalb, although there are other terms that are also used, what it actually lent to, it was taqarrub of Allah. And my cursory reading or whatever reading I have had of world religions is that Islam, when it categorizes people, the scriptural language is bit different than what people assume it to be. Generally, people assume it to be a very dualistic binary kind of a division in which there are good people and then there are bad people. But Surah Al-Waqi'ah, it uses a tripartite distinction actually between people. It talks about Ashab al-Mash'ama, Ashab al-Maymana, right-handers and left-handers, and then talks about As-Sabiqun As-Sabiqun, Sabqat, which those who just keep on moving ahead, or who have actually, who are ahead in leading. And then it says, Ulaiq al-Muqarrabun. These are the people who are close to God. It talks the verses immediately after the mention of as-sabiqun as-sabiqun. So the taqarrub of Allah or taqarrub of God, the proximity of God, was the focus of this discourse. And as with any discourse, what happened is that when those people, we will call them Sufis, although I don't see it doing a lot of justice to employ an umbrella term, but now it's widely accepted. Let's call them Sufis or Ahl Batin or people of Irfan. They developed their own terminology in due course of a time, which is obvious, which is bound to happen, which they described their own experiences. For instance, why I'm talking, by the way, I'm talking about it is so as to give an idea of the language, which becomes very important here. For instance, they employ a term called hal, which is very common with people of tasawwuf. And in the literature of Islamic mystical literature, you will find various definitions for hal. But for instance, let us suppose Abdul Razak Kashani, who belongs to the intellectual or the spiritual school of Ibn Arabi, he describes hal as something that comes into heart and changes the state of heart. It's a change in state. For instance, there can be fear, there can be awe, there can be strong fascination, there can be qabz, contraction, spiritual contraction, or bust, spiritual expansion. But the important thing with hal is that it is not induced through a practice. It's a bestowal. It's a gift. And then he talks about maqam. I chose to take his definition because that allows us to stay closer to what generally has been termed as school of Ibn Arabi. although I don't know how proper it is. So then he says maqam, because hall is transient in nature. And I think when William James is talking about spiritual states in his varieties of religious experience, among the four qualities of any mystical or religious experience that he is talking, one is transiency of experience. That mystical experience is transient in nature. It does not persist. So it is a state. So he is primarily talking about hal there. But within the school of with Ahl Batin, there is another thing called maqam. Maqam can be defined as Abdul Razak Kashani, who is like third generation from Ibn Arabi. He says when hal persists in heart and continues to exist over a period of time, it becomes a stage rather than state. So he defines it as maqam. This is, by the way, his Istalahat Sufia, one of his texts. Now, what happened is that with any discourse, when it comes into being or when it actualizes, it is bound to interact with other intellectual, spiritual, or literary currents available, as we were talking in its immediate context, as we're already talking about. Islamic philosophy or Islamic spirituality or Islamic intellectual trend generally also came into interaction with Greeks very early on. And this is very important. And when it came into Greeks, it specifically came into touch with Greek intellectual and philosophical trends through the translation of Plato and Aristotle, who were getting increasingly translated in early Islamic history. Now, how Muslim intellectuals have generally seen Plato is like Plato's tendency is more towards mysticism, while Aristotle's tendency is more towards discursive reasoning and logic. And this divide, this epistemological divide, actually played into that Islamic culture that was emerging and that was developing itself. Now, I will cursorily go through certain tendencies, intellectual tendencies that were present in early Islam. And before that, I would like to make a point, which is that the debate between Ahl Zahir and Ahl Batin within Islam specifically, and I believe generally this is applicable to other religions also. It is essentially, if we look, it is hermeneutic in nature, especially with Islam, because in Islam, with regards to the source of religion, the source aspect of epistemology, there is absolute consensus with regard to what lies at the center of Islamic discourse. There is complete consensus that there is the divine revealed text of Quran at its center. Although there are nowadays the trend that particularly is very popular is that Quran and Hadith. Although we do not find Hadith being kind of a parallel discourse to Quran in very early in Islam. This, in my research and my understanding, this is actually post Shafi, because Imam Shafi, he actually introduces the idea of, when he talks about the phenomena of revelation, wahi, in his Ar-Risala, he says that there are two kinds of wahi, matlu and ghair matlu. So ghair matlu, he calls sunnah ghair matlu and says that khabar, which is hadith, is actually repository of that sunnah. There are certain debates, even whether people want to consider it as a parallel source in Islam or not. But with regards to Quran, there is absolute certainty. So whoever group was trying to work upon Islam and interpret their own view of Islam had to take recourse to Quran. Specifically with regards to Sufis, just a second. Musa, आप बाहर जाओ बेटा, यहाँ मैं काम कर रहा हूँ, जाओ दरवाजा बंद कर लो. Job. Close the door. Good boy. I'm sorry. So Sufis also had to take recourse to Quran. So initially, when Sufi tafsirs were being written, there was this idea of ishara. When I'm talking about the hermeneutics, how there is finally there is the principal differences between actually how hermeneutically to approach the Quran. So Sufis actually talked about this idea called ishara. And this ishara finds its place in the multivocity of the text, if we are to coin it in modern idiom, or how a certain statement can have different levels of meaning for different readers or different perceivers. It can be talked about in those terms that there are subtle hints for salik, for people who actually are on the pathway of experiencing religion rather than just cognitively and intellectually understanding religion. And why that ishara or hint unfolds to salik alone and not to somebody who engages with Quran intellectually or cognitively or through discursive reasoning is because salik's own experience informs that understanding. So this is where the triad becomes important. There is this text by Masood Baq. Masood Baq was a Sufi in India during Mughal times. His book Miratul Arifin actually mentions this triad of epistemological triad. Although this has echoes throughout Muslim uh, mystical literature. We find it repeatedly, but Masood Baq has engaged with epistemology in a very prolific manner. So there's a level of ilm al-yaqeen, and then there is ayn al-yaqeen, and then there is haqq al-yaqeen. So ilm al-yaqeen is that I hear about the fire, for instance, that somebody through his testimony informs me that there's fire somewhere. Ayn al-yaqeen is that I see the fire. And Haqqal Yaqeen is I become part of fire by just going into the fire. So there is, I am burning, the fire is burning. So won't be able to tell subject from object. So these kinds of hermeneutics were developed by Sufis or Ahl Batin, people of Irfan, very early on. And that is what actually led to the divide from the point of view of epistemology and the source. They interpreted Quran differently in the light of their experience, which they somehow saw mirroring the prophetic experience itself. Their engagement with Quran and its meaning was existential in nature, as compared to the other schools primarily, who were a Zahir, which was more on exoteric nature. So we have we were talking about there's a beautiful distinction that has been drawn by this Iranian polymath. Uh, his name is I came across this Sayyid Haider Amuli. He is one of the interpreters of Ibn Arabi in Iran, in modern Iran, actually, one of the very reputed figures. So he says that when he talks about this triad, he talks about in terms of Sharia, Haqiqa, Sharia, Tariqa, and Haqiqa. Sharia for him, he sees is a path which has the path, and it's primarily consisting of permissibilities and prohibitions. Like if we create an example, it's a walking on a path and not going beyond a certain point. It is how to discipline oneself. But tariqa for Amuli is exercising the maximum precaution on that path. It is assuming the best possible position that one can potentially assume as a salik within that Sharia. And that is what is interesting about Ibn Arabi also, which sets him more closer to Islamic orthodoxy than many antinomian Sufis. Many people who have just heard about, especially in this modern era of disinformation. Usually somebody mentions or talks to me because he thinks that I have interest in Islamic mysticism and talks about Ibn Arabi in very pejorative terms, like he was deviant, he was zindiq and all. It doesn't understand basically how subtle he is. So what actually brings Ibn Arabi more closer to Islamic orthodoxy is his emphasis on Sharia. He never wants to leave Quran, as I was also making the comment from Abdul Ghani Nablusi. Last time I also shared it. Nablusi says why Ibn Arabi's critics actually found it very difficult for them to burn his books, because they had it kind of created a scandal in Islamic intellectual spheres. They had never seen anything like that. They had seen Sufis. They had seen maybe Qushayri's Risala, which is standard manual of Sufism. They had come across Quwwatul Qulub of Abu Talib Maqi, which is another magisterial compendium of Islamic spirituality. But they had never seen articulation of spiritual experience in terms in which Ibn Arabi puts it. And that too in his lifetime. I mean, just one book, Futuhat. It is like an ocean. Even age are, one requires multiple lifetimes over to just read Futuhat and understand what is going on. So it was kind of an also what sets Ibn Arabi close is one, his attachment to Quran. Most of people here, I assume, are interested in Ibn Arabi, and they must have seen how he, what we call, talks. When he engages in a subject, he hardly ventures away from Quran. So he keeps himself very close to Quran, trying to always see the play in the language and the levels of. He's very sophisticated that way. And then we talked about tariqa is the way of maximum precaution, choosing the superlative, whether that is in kalam, speech, that is in quality, that is in action. And haqiqa is the affirmation of that action through experience. It is being the fire. Now, this kind of terminology makes it seem very pantheistic, but we will see that what sets it apart from pantheism later on. So Sharia is to worship God, tariqa is to attain his presence, and haqiqa is to witness him. And this, by the way, this triad is also, this is mentioned by Sayyid Haidar Amuli, and it has also been mentioned by Hamza Fanari. Hamza Fanari, if I remember correctly, was the first Ottoman jurisprudent who was awarded as Sheikh al-Islam, first Sheikh al-Islam, if I remember it correctly, by Ottomans. So Hamza Fanari is very Ibn Arabian in his approach, and he reiterates the same triad. Now we will cursorily go through philosophical schools, which I feel is very important, just to brush off and engage other people who might not have an idea about philosophical schools in Islam. First is Kalam. Kalam is scholastic theology. It is the earliest intellectual tendency that seems to develop in the history in Islam. Kalam emerges primarily immediately after Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it emerges somewhere, in my understanding, it emerges just around Siffin, when Hazrat Ali Karamullah Ta'ala Wajhu, he is engaging on two fronts. He is battling Muawiyah, and on another hand, he is battling Khawarij, who defect from his army. And then it is the first major theological question, which was that whether the grave sinner continues to be Muslim or not. It is a very important question, and it is actually starts the beginning of Kalam. But then it involved a full-fledged, organized group called Mu'tazilis, who engaged with the opponents, Asharis. And primarily this was about, it actually started about the speech of God, the nature of speech of God. And this debate has parallels in Christianity also, very early. When Christology was being set post-Nicene Creed, the nature of the Logos, the nature of the Christ, what is the nature of Christ. And Christianity also has very rich debates about it, the nature of Logos. And Logos is very Johannine. When I say Johannine, what I mean is like Gospel of John, it actually starts with the mention of Logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So it is the Kalamullah that is being talked. If I have to find an Arabic equivalent from Quran, not that I'm suggesting that there is one-on-one mapping, but there is definite linguistic affinity between the two terms. So it started with the debate in Islam. It started with the debate over the speech of God, the nature of whether it is eternal, co-eternal with God, or whether it is created. And major proponents of this school have been, it's actually dialectical theology, scholastic theology in Islam. People like Abdul Jabbar, who was a big Mu'tazili, nowadays forgotten, I think, except in certain intellectual schools. There is Abul Hasan Ashari, there is Abu Mansur Maturidi, there is Nasiruddin Tusi, and people like Adududdin Iji. That whole debate within the school of Kalam is about the nature of God, the nature of existence, and also the relationship of God with His creation. Epistemology in Kalam, how they take sources is this is very important. I'll be mentioning a lot about epistemology because when talking about Ibn Arabi, we will be moving between two poles of ontology and epistemology. And I think pretty much is contained between these two poles. So in Kalam, actually, epistemology is the source is taken is scripture primarily. So the whole debate and discourse is done in a very scriptural language. There is a category that Ahl Batin use. It is called kashf or unveiling. This epistemologically sets them apart from other groups, intellectual groups. I will use Sufis as one of the groups, or Ahl Batin as one of the intellectual groups, because they were not just the practitioners, especially post Ibn Arabi and his students and his students of his students, the whole school that grew around him. They are like, they have done a lot of work in trying to articulate that spiritual experience through a certain language and to lend it certain credibility in Orthodox Islamic circles. Otherwise, it would be an esoteric discipline that some Sufi is practicing in his hospice somewhere, and people are completely devoid of what is happening. So in my opinion, so as to make it more mainstream, lot of intellectual exercise has happened, particularly post Ibn Arabi, and immediately Sadruddin Qunavi, who was the son-in-law and the major articulator and the commentator of Ibn Arabi, his school, and there are many, Dawud Khaisari and Tilmisani and other people. So in Kalam, basically, the source is scriptural. They don't take resort to kashf. Now, what kashf is? Kashf is an epistemological category. It is a means of knowing in Ahl Batin. It is based on direct experience. Direct experience, I mean, is that I was engaging over this idea with myself for almost 1 year. Would there be primacy of kashf in Ahl Batin over any other experience? So if you people permit, I can put across my views. When we perceive a certain thing in a cognitive and empirical realm, for instance, I see a chair over there. I am convinced of this chair. I am not thinking whether this is not chair. I'm sorry to assume very philosophical language. I'm convinced of this chair. But what convinces me? It can also be hallucination. And this kind of approach is actually dealt in Advaita very properly. They use 3 categories. One is Paramarthika, Vyavharika, and Pratibhashika. Pratibhashika is illusory. Sometimes I see a rope and I mistake it for the snake. So the conviction itself is It convinces, the experience convinces me that it is chair. But with kashf, and when we read about kashf and those people who have experienced it, the degree of conviction is very, very high, because they have had the share of both the worlds. They have had the conviction that comes through empirical reality or through rational argumentation. That direct witnessing is very convincing for them. That is why the primacy of kashf in Ahl Batin. And why exoteric theologians are dismissive of kashf, let us suppose in Kalam, is because they don't experience it. So they continue to. I am reminded of Carl G. Jung's dream, the famous psychoanalytics dream. He was talking about unconscious. He says, when I was young, I was always seeing this house and I was living in the one room. Then something happened and I realized that the house had many rooms upstairs also. And there was another floor beyond that. So many actually do not realize that there are places within the soul that can act, that can help us realize or experience something that is beyond cognition, beyond empirical reality. So for people of Kalam, there is no place of kashf. They just primarily rely on scriptural, their scriptural primacy. Then we have another school which is Masha. Masha is peripatetic school. It is actually centered how Aristotle did his philosophy. Aristotelian school is called peripatetic school because it is said that in his school Lyceum he continued to walk and teach his students while walking. Sometimes on a humorous note, I think Aristotle must have had ADHD. He couldn't sit in one place. On a lighter note. So Masha means walking. Mashiyat. In certain Arabic idiom, it means walking. And these Islamic peripatetics employed it in the sense that it is like walking from one point to another in an intellectual discourse. How logic unfolds, like how syllogism unfolds, and using those instruments and devices, of course, linguistic and intellectual instruments and devices to arrive at the truth. So it's like walking from one premise to another and to infer. And famous people of this school were Al-Kindi, who is regarded as the first philosopher in Islamic history. There's Al-Farabi. Al-Farabi is generally called a second teacher in that school because the first teacher is Aristotle. So Al-Farabi is the greatest articulator of Aristotle in Islam. There is Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina, I wish someday we can sit, I can talk about a bit about the influence of Ibn Sina's whole thought, how he informs the school of Ibn Arabi. Ibn Sina, by the way, is one single person who is the most influential of all Islamic philosophers. He is also equally influential in West and has influenced the Western philosophy. And also he's more famous also because of his canon of medicine. He was a doctor also. So these people believed that truth can be known through rational argumentation and deductive reasoning, which is hallmark of Aristotelian school. This school also paid attention to metaphysical concerns. They dealt with metaphysics because Aristotle he's a student of Plato, and he is kind of, when he is developing his philosophy, he is in a way responding to Plato and also creating a critique of Plato at the same time. So because in Plato metaphysics takes primacy, Aristotle devoted a single separate book on metaphysics. So the influence of Aristotle that permeates into this Islamic peripatetic school, and their concerns were also they were engaged in metaphysics. Although this school generally does not believe in kashf and wants to arrive at the truth through logical reasoning and deductive reasoning, but except for Ibn Sina. In the 9th section or 9th book of his Isharat, he admits kashf as one of the valid categories of, yes, he admits one of the valid categories. It is the 9th section of his Isharat, Al-Ishara. It has a long title, I think, Al-Isharat wa Tambih, if I remember it correctly. So he admits He is unique in that sense. His epistemology is a bit different than other members of the school and admits Kashf as um, a valid category. Generally, focus is on rational thought, as I already said. And this school has another sub school, which is trying to articulate whole Islamic discourse on the lines of Neoplatonism, the school of Plotinus and Porphyry. And it was done by this sophisticated society, Ikhwan al-Safa. We have heard more legends about them, the brethren of the purity. Very, those people actually took from various sources. They took from Mandaeanism, Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism. These people are more famous about the secrecy around their circles. Very sophisticated school. And it was also present in it. We can subcategorize it under the Islamic peripatetic philosophy. Then we have school of Ishraq. I'm just running through the schools before I arrive at Ibn Arabi, and also putting across how they epistemologically, what is their epistemological position vis-a-vis Islamic discourse. Then we have Ishraq. Now, Ishraq is unique. One of the, I find him a very profound thinker of Islamic mysticism is Ahmad Javed. Ahmad Javed is a Pakistani. He worked in Iqbal Academy. He calls, in one of his lecture, he said that, and I take him very seriously personally, he said that Shahabuddin Suharwardi is the most original thinker in Islamic, in terms of originality. So Ishraq is basically a tradition developed around Plato in Islam. If we go through Shahabuddin Suharwardi, he develops, for me, to a certain extent, if Ahmad Javed's comment is, or his observation is challengeable. But in how he develops it, that is unique in itself. But like in Plato, there are forms. In Shahabuddin Suharwardi also we find same kinds of ideas. So it is primarily Islamic response or appropriation, Islamic appropriation or intellectual appropriation of Plotinus and Plato, Neoplatonists to a certain extent, and Plato. The central idea is that truth is known through divine illumination. That is the central idea. And Kashf is central to the school. That there is direct witnessing of the truth. And this happens after soul has become purified. Now, when we come down in the flow of history, we will see somewhere that later Sufi thought actually was amalgam of many thoughts together. Some borrowed from peripatetic philosophy, some borrowed from Ishraq, and some borrowed from Ibn Arabi, and creating an amalgam. That is why it is really difficult to identify certain positions in recent Sufis, because it's amalgam of many things together. Although this path focuses primarily on Kashf, but they don't limit themselves to Kashf. They see Kashf as a result of self-purification, but they also involve themselves into logic and deductive reasoning, trying to arrive at argumentation through that. And many scholars in the tradition of Ibn Arabi also borrow terminology from Ishraqi philosophers, from Shahabuddin Suharwardi Maqtul. He's generally called Maqtul because, according to historical reports, he was beheaded for his views, which were quite novel at that time. Now, one of the giants of Islamic intellectual tradition, Mullah Sadra, actually calls, he has written a commentary on Shahabuddin Suharwardi's book called Hikmat al-Ishraq, roughly translated as the wisdom of illuminationism. The school is translated as illuminationism. And he says, this book, in his commentary on Hikmat al-Ishraq, he says, this book is the apple of eye of Arifun, of the Gnostics, and Ahl Mushahada, people of witnessing. Place is really high. So we have people like Shahabuddin Suharwardi, Jalaluddin Davani, and Qutbuddin Shirazi in the school. Then we have school of transcendent philosophy, Al-Hikmat al-Muta'aliya. Certain books actually subcategorize Mullah Sadra under the same head of Ishraq, because he heavily borrows from that. And they try to formulate the link as like from Shahabuddin Suharwardi, then Shahabuddin Swarwardi's student Mir Damad, and then Mir Damad's student Mullah Sadra. But Mullah Sadra is unique in certain sense, and I think it would be appropriate to categorize him separately. It's based on his book. His book is central to his whole philosophy. It's called Al Asfar. So Al Asfar is a compendium of traditional philosophy that synthesizes a rational and mystical approach. And it includes ontology, natural philosophy, eschatology, soteriology. It kind of deals with many subjects together and synthesizes them. Now, one thing unique about Mullah Sadra's approach is he combines three epistemic modalities. What are they? One is reason, another is revelation, and third is inspiration. Inspiration would be also what we call kashf. So because schools have been contesting with each other on the basis of the epistemological approach, so he tries to unify that. So see the uniqueness of Mullah Sadra. Mullah Sadra, he combines Aristotelian peripatetic philosophy of Ibn Sina, Ibn Sina's peripatetic Aristotle. He combines that with the school of Ishraq, and then combines furthermore also employs the scholastic theology and Sufism of Ibn Arabi. So he is amalgam of three things. One, Ibn Sina, another, Shahabuddin Suharwardi, and Ibn Arabi. And he's recent, he's like 16th century. Very influential philosopher. And then we have a school of Sufism or Tasawwuf. We started our discussion with that. They are primarily concerned with batin, and the primary mode, not just primary mode, but rather the exclusive emphasis on the type of truth is that which is acquired through personal experience, subject to experience, through mushahada or kashf, as compared to truths that are acquired through inferences or maybe through discursive reasoning. And actually, Sufis in general look down upon, they look at that kind of truth, exoteric truths, very pejoratively. Whether that is right or wrong, I'll not pass the judgment. But general tendency of Sufis is that they try to look down. I am reminded of one of the comments from the biography of the greatest saint from Kashmir, Sheikh Hamza Makhdoom Kashmiri, one of the phenomenal saints from Kashmir. In one of his biographies, he's talking to his students and he tells his student to stay away from exoteric people, exoteric ulama. I remember the passage maybe a decade ago I had read it. He says, because they talk about things they have not experienced, they don't know. And Sufis generally look down upon such kind of epistemological approach. There, the whole focus is on the inner journey. Now, while we are trying to talk about Sufism, we talk about the articulation of the Sufism itself. And the greatest articulator of the Sufism is Ibn Arabi. There is absolutely no doubt about it. There have been manuals written, there's so much Sufi literature, but I think the greatest articulator of Sufism, and also, if we can say, the greatest apologetician for Sufism, is Ibn Arabi. He stands like a towering figure there. Just one book, 560 chapters, we know about Futuhat. And he is able, what is the greatness of Ibn Arabi is he is able to develop a complete worldview. That is important. He is not just profound, but he is also complete. So sometimes we come across, while engaging with intellectual currents and thoughts, we come across profound thinkers, but they are not able to expound a coherent vision, a complete coherent vision. Ibn Arabi is successful in that. Whether correct or not, separate thing. We're not discussing the rectitude of the idea here. But yes, we have to give it to him that he is complete. And not only that, the greatness of Ibn Arabi is that post Ibn Arabi, one, he cannot be left out of any intellectual discussion of Islam. And two, post Ibn Arabi, the whole idea of Sufism is either about Ibn Arabi appropriating him or criticizing him. So there is no way you can avoid him. You have to engage with him. Even reform movements within the Sufism itself. For instance, one attempt was done by supposedly, we will talk about that, Mujaddid al-Ifsani Sheikh Ahmad Sarhandi. He is kind of a reformist within Sufism. Another reform was taken in Chishtiyas by Nasiruddin Mahmud Roshan Charag Dehlvi. To the extent that Chistis usually humorously say that they were ruled for 44 years by a Wahhabi. He was such a reformist. And there is another reformist within Sufism is Delami. Delami tried to reorient the whole Sufi discourse more on ethical lines. So with Ibn Arabi, one has to necessarily engage with him. That the whole current of intellectual history has engaged with him, and they are bound to engage with him either in favor, appropriate him, or reject him or criticize him. Just to stay not mentioned. So as we already talked about, Fusus is very important in a sense. Fusus has 560 chapters, and it's not one expects it to be a Sufi manual like Kushairi's Risala or Qutul Qulub of Makiba. It's not. It actually touches upon every aspect of Islamic discourse, to the extent that I have come across a report by Ibn Taymiyyah that, and I may be able to locate the source also if anybody wants, that he did not have as much problem with Fusus as much he had with, he did not have as much problem with Futuhat Makkiyah as much he had with Fusus al-Hikam. This is very early on with Ibn Arabi. So because Ibn Arabi's canvas is so vast, and that compels, one of the reasons for me personally to believe in inspiration is how an individual can come up with such a coherent and such a comprehensive canvas, taking into consideration every aspect of Islamic discourse. It must certainly be inspired somehow. So Fusus, as we talked about, has 100 commentaries. Now we'll talk about Ibn Arabi's epistemology. Epistemologically, he does something strange. He does not invent terms like every discourse needs to invent terms in order to articulate the experience of that school or school generally. He generally tends to borrow terminology, as I said in the beginning of the discussion, the talk itself, that he borrows the terminology primarily from different schools from different schools, but primarily from the philosophers. And there are already discussions of Wujood going on. But then he turns the whole discourse on heels and provides its own meaning to them. And one would definitely, while trying to engage with Ibn Arabi, see the similarity of the terms, and there's a shared terminology between the both. Although, this is worth to mention, Ibn Arabi in Futuhat Makkiyah categorically makes this statement that philosophy is counterproductive approach towards going to the truth. Although he's very philosophical in nature, but then he maintains this position and he holds on to that position, I believe. There was no change in that position later on, that it is counterproductive. So in Fusus, he says that what sets a salik, a person of batin or Ahl Irfan, apart from Ahl Zahir or exoteric theology, is that how he defines it. There are many ways to define that, but he says that messengers and Sufis, they have the knowledge of the soul. The translation says soul, but I believe what Ibn Arabi is trying to talk about, it's not soul, it is spirit. Because one-on-one translation would be spirit, would be, for me, spirit would be ar-ruh. The mysterious entity that was breathed into the talib of Adam or humans generally. Whereas soul is more like nafs, the psyche. And then we know jasad. Jasad means the body. One remark is that I want to make here is why I want to set this differentiation between our ruh, the spirit and soul, is this is to avoid the mistake that Carl G. Jung has made while trying to understand the nature of psyche. He confuses soul with or conflates soul with spirit. Now, this has been properly emphasized by perennialists. Particularly, I think it is in René Guénon, that he says that dimensionality of psyche is horizontal. And it involves a lot of things like creative arts, poetry, anything that emerges out of psyche. But our ruh, the spirit, is vertical. So any engagement of ruh is vertical, and verticality is symbol of kind of a symbolic of God, because Islamic discourse when Quran creates imageries about God, it creates in terms of like seven skies, and at the top of it is Arsh, the whole imagery. So Ibn Arabi says that is what sets Sufis and messengers apart, that they have the knowledge of spirit. So this is also important. Another corollary of it would be because Islamic whole Islamic discourse sees that in pre-eternity, when the covenant of human spirits took place with God in Alami Arwah, in the realm of the soul spirits, where God asked all the spirits, "Who is your Rabb? Who is your Lord? Alasta bi Rabbikum?" And we said, "Indeed you are." Kalu bala. Subhanallah wa ta'ala amma yushrikun. So that nature of ruh becomes uh, once the nature of the ruh or something about ruh is revealed, it is also symbolically reminiscent of at what many Sufis say in their experience, that we have witnessed our pre-eternal covenant with the God. We are reminded, kind of. They go back in their cosmic memory. It's evoked, and they have witnessed that covenant with God, and they remember it. So it essentially emerges out of the knowledge of the nature of soul. Ibn Arabi goes on to criticize the reason-based approach. He is very categorical in that, and he says that if anybody chooses any other path to truth other than that of batin, he is bound to fail. And only people to whom the nature of soul and the nature of existence will be revealed is those who engage with batin. Now, epistemologically, there are two views within this approach also. Because Ibn Arabi continued, or rather his views continue, or thought process, his philosophy continued to develop post Ibn Arabi, and one should not take away the credit from all other people who were in that lineage. We will be talking about those people pretty soon, like Gandhi or Punavi or Kaisari or Tilmisani or Farghani. They also equally contributed to, like Jami says, I remember if a comment from his Nafahatul Uns, where he talks about Futuhat Makkiyah. He says, nobody can understand Ibn Arabi unless he goes through Sadruddin Kunavi. So Kunavi kind of becomes a door. So one should not take away credit. And within the school itself, there is a little difference over epistemological position. One view within the school, this approach is that unveiling or kashf is the only way to do approach to truth. But there is another school which is employed by Kunavi, Jandi, Kashani, and Kaisari, who are like the major interpreters of Ibn Arabi to the rest of the world within that tradition. They employ, they also employ reason. Because if you read those muqaddimat, their books on Ibn Arabi, you will see how discursively they build argument. But what retains the distinguishing character of that argument is that they always come back to the spiritual experience to validate it. Just a second, I'll take a call. Am I back online? I'm sorry, I had an urgent call. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you're audible. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So,
If you don't mind, while you interrupted yourself, do you know roughly how long do you like to continue, just so everyone else
I think
knows?
half an hour more. How long
No.
are we into the discussion?
We
I will
spent
just try to brush
an
through.
hour.
We are already 1 hour into the discussion.
Yes, that's right. You're a very good talker. You're a very good speaker, which is excellent. You have very good.
Unfortunately, no Kash here, which would inform me of the time. I lose the sense of time.
You are
It's very
practicing
passionate for
capture.
me also, and the kind of appreciation I get that you people are able to, you are generous enough to hear me out. I mean, I'm really humbled by that.
It's a
And this
pleasure.
has been my passion throughout my life. I don't think I fostered any other passion so closely to my heart, except for like to seek truth. Anyways, so they'll just brush through. So why generally this thing is missed, and I wanted to make this point. Why they include those people include reasoning into their approach is also to articulate that spiritual experience and to lend certain authenticity. So, school of Ibn Arabi and the future of Ibn Arabi. So Muhammad Rustum, one of the major scholars of Ibn Arabi, says what sets Ibn Arabi's approach different, apart from any other school, is one thing, is his engagement with Wujood. It is nearly reminiscent of what Martin Heidegger does in Western philosophy. So Martin Heidegger engaged with being. There's a lot of similarity, although on different lines altogether, how he sees being and how Ibn Arabi sees Wujood. But the complaint is, the nature of complaint is the same. There Martin Heidegger takes Western philosophers to task because he says they have involved in everything except for being. And then whole philosophy of Heidegger, who is one of the most important philosophers of 20th century, and according to some, the most important, more important than Wittgenstein, maybe. Ibn Arabi's central concern is Wujood. And as we were talking about, so what is the thing with that? Ibn Arabi writes, as Rustum says, he writes in Arabic. This is the beauty. And it is as Frank and we were talking last time, also Frank, in one-on-one discussion or talk we were having, what is the difficulty? He writes in classical Arabic. And that Arabic is heavily infused with allegories, with how he uses words, with a play on words. So it becomes difficult to understand even for the normal Arabic speaker. That sets Ibn Arabi apart. And because Ibn Arabi's books are primarily articulation of his vision and of his experience, it makes it even more difficult. Because the reader does not share the same, there is no overlapping of the experiential domain. That is why Ibn Arabi mentions one thing. He says, my books or my words will be mainly appreciated by those who are people of Ahl Mushahada, who themselves have experienced something, rather than to approach it intellectually. So, in order to make Ibn Arabi's texts more understandable to public, there were not many commentaries written. And they are primarily been Ibn Arabi's main articulators are Sadruddin Kunavi, Dawood Kayseri, Afifuddin Tilmisani, Muayyiduddin Jandi, there is Sayyiduddin Fargahani and Abdul Razak Kashani, whose student was Dawood Kayseri, was Abdul Razak Kashani's student. And interestingly, what has been projected as Tafsiri Ibn Arabi is, it's very famous. Even at-tafsir.org has puts it as Ibn Arabi tafsir. There is no tafsir of Ibn Arabi. It's actually a tafsir by Abdul Razak Kashani. And there are other people also like Saduddin Hamuya, Azizuddin Nasafi, Mahmud Shabistari, Sayyid Haidar Amoli, Abdul Karim Jildi, Hamza Fanari, Hamza Fansuri, Lahiji, Abdul Ghani Nablusi. They are very prominent people. Especially, I would like a comment, a line or two about Shabistari. Shebistari is writer of a Masnavi in Farsi. Abhi jao Musa, Musa मैं काम कर रहा हूँ, अब जाओ मेरी जान. He is a commentator. He is. It is said about Shebistari that his book Gulshan Raz, unless one does not read Gulshan Raz, nobody can go to Ibn Arabi. So the major poetic articulation of Ibn Arabi's vision is Gulshan Raz, and then it is an equally abstruse book. Which, by the way, I gifted Gulshan Raz recently a text to my sheikh. He was really interested in reading Gulshan Raz, by the way, and it has an 800-page commentary by Lahiji, and it is the poetic exposition of Ibn Arabi's school. The importance of Ibn Arabi is that, oh, sorry, I want to make a comment about few more, which is Nasafi. Azizuddin Nasafi, his importance is that he integrated Ibn Arabi with the school of Najmuddin Kubra. So Najmuddin Kubra has a suluk. He is Najmuddin Kubra's school is very famous even in subcontinent, and Kubreviyas share space. It is present also in medieval Shiism and also in Sunnism. So suluk is done on the both theological lines. Kubrevis are present both. So Azizuddin Nasafi integrated Ibn Arabi's vision with Najmuddin Kubra's school. He was a disciple of Sa'duddin Hamuya, and Hamuya was direct disciple of Najmuddin Kubra. So on one line, he is coming from Ibn Arabi, and on the other hand, he has the bayat in Kubrevi Sulsula. So Amuli, there is another Abu Haidar Amuli. Amuli actually articulates Ibn Arabi's vision within the framework of 12 Shiism. And Amuli fundamentally believes that Ibn Arabi's whole thought is an esoteric interpretation of Shiism. So what I'm trying to emphasize is how wide Ibn Arabi's reach is, how influential he has been. And then his Jami al-Asrar, Sayyid Haidar Amuli, is considered as a standard textbook in Irfan. Irfan is the term generally used for mysticism by Shias, whereas Tasawwuf or Suluk is used by Sunnis, but is used interchangeably. And he has written Al-Muhit al-Azam, which is kind of a long 7-volume commentary on Fusus. Then we have very famous Abdul Karim Jilli, who has written complete manual on Insan al-Kamil. We were talking about Hamza Fanari. Fanari was the first Sheikh al-Islam in Ottoman Turkey. He was also heavily influenced by Ibn Arabi. It's kind of in that school. Then we have Jami. Jami is important. Jami is important because he has written multiple books, and he is the major expounder of Ibn Arabi's vision to Persianate world, to Indian subcontinent, and to China. And Sachiko Murata has made an important point about Jami. He says that initially 4 books about Islam were translated into Chinese as an introduction of Islam to Chinese. 2 of them were from Jami. 2 books were from Jami. So to understand early Chinese Islam, it was impossible to understand Islam without getting oriented to the Ibn Arabi's vision. It was primarily Ibn Arabian vision. So his Nafahat, Uns, and Ashatul Luma, they are very famous books. And Jami was a dedicated person. His first book is about Ibn Arabi. His last book is about Ibn Arabi. And Professor Mufti Mudassir, one of the Sundays, talked about Jami's influence over Kashmiri poetry also. And then we have Abdul Ghani Nablusi. Nablusi's Jawahar al-Nusus, which is Sharah Fusus, is the major, most read text regarding Ibn Arabi's interpretation in Arab world. So now Ibn Arabi is not a visionary. He's not a philosopher, he's a visionary. He roots himself in experience, not much in deductive reasoning. But although there are tendencies where he completely dismisses philosophy and philosophical approach, but sometimes he takes it on board. The vast canvas of his futuhat and his approach allows him to take on board, but he says that they lack basira, that they are not able to see beyond. And then I'll just move fast so as not to. And the last most important is Sadruddin Qunavi. I want to make a mention of Sadruddin Qunavi because he is like, when you make mention of Ibn Taymiyyah, you cannot miss Ibn Qayyim Jawziyah. He is called Saniye Isnan, the second of the two. So with Ibn Arabi also, he is Saniye Isnan, Qunavi. He is his stepson. He is his son-in-law. He has received ijazah to transmit. Only person who has directly, we know for certain that he has received ijazah from Ibn Arabi. Now, most of the people nowadays do not know that it was essential to receive ijazah, to transmit texts, not only in the ulumul hadith, but also beyond ulumul hadith. And this practice is very early, because there is one anecdote when Imam Malik is in Medina and he has finished with his Muwatta, and there were many students who were studying with Malik. And Shafi'i comes. He is born in Gaza, present day Gaza. May God have mercy upon those brethren of ours. He comes from Gaza and he comes to Malik and then he wants to recite Muwatta to him. And Malik says, recite it to some of my students. Says, no, I want to recite it to you. And then he recites it verbatim and he gets the ijazah. So ijazah, institution of ijazah is very important. So Qunavi has direct ijazah from Ibn Arabi. So like Ibn Arabi is called Sheikh al-Akbar, he is called Sheikh al-Kabir. He is the greatest master, and Qunavi is called Grand Master. And he was 20 years old when he received the ijazah to transmit Ibn Arabi's whole corpus. That shows what a prolific person he must have been. And Jami makes one point about Qunavi, which was earlier. There is that it is impossible to approach Ibn Arabi without going through Sadruddin Qunavi. It takes me 20 minutes. I'm just rushing. Everybody wants to go. Everybody's bored.
Yes, it would be nice if we have time for discussion. That's the reason.
Yeah, I'll just run through things now. Although I had more to say, but inshallah, let's hope.
We can give you a part 3 if you like.
I hope this is not going to be like Hollywood movies.
No, well, it's not a pressure, but if you want more time, you are choosing to do another part.
I would like to, there are many things to be talked about because it's nearly impossible to talk about. First, it will take a lot of time to talk about the ontology of Ibn Arabi.
Maybe if you don't have enough time to finish it all today.
But I want to make one point, how Kashf is different and what needs to be said about Kashf. Quran talks about ayat. And I want to bring the whole discussion closer to Quran, because in Islam, if any intellectual, scholastic approach or even spiritual approach does not have the validation from Quran, particularly, specifically from Quran, and I'm not being dismissive of Sunnah, of course Sunnah too, but Quran, because Quran is like natik, it is written. Those things have been viewed very skeptically, and any cursory or any deep reading of any Islamic school will immediately lend to the reader that the whole discussion is centered around Quran and developing its hermeneutics to suit a certain school. Now, what is actually Kashf? There are many things that have been talked about Kashf, but if we look at Kashf, we can integrate it like this. Quran talks about ayat. It repeatedly talks about ayat. So ayat has been translated as sign. I do not personally see ayat as sign. For me, ayat is primarily a symbol. It is not sign. And God says there are 3 kinds of ayat, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then there are ayat in the afaq, in the universe, in the macrocosm, a world outside the subject. There are ayat in the anfus, within the soul. And then there are ayat which are the functional and the structural unit of Quran, ayah. So there are 3 ayats. And any understanding has to be somehow, when viewed Quranically, in my humble opinion, has to be amalgam of three things have to inform together. So Ahle Zahir look at the ayat outside. Ahle Batin have tended to look at the ayat on the nafs, nufus or within. And they both have tried to link it with Quran. Quran makes an important point. He says, Hatta yatabayna lahum annahu al-haq. That we will surely show you our signs in the world outside, in the cosmos outside, and within yourselves, till you are certain. Hatta yatabayna lahum annahu al-haq. That you are certain that this is truth. So certitude can only be experienced through a spiritual means, where the truth inside reconciles with the truth outside, and there is a validation, scriptural validation from Quran. This is how it works according to me. And ayat is symbol. How is symbol different than sign? Sign has fixed meaning. Symbol operates subjectively. I would definitely recommend Carl G. Jung's later writings about anybody who wants to read about symbol. Carl G. Jung has done brilliant work. So what it does, what symbol is a window which allows a person to look into transcendent. It is not transcendent in itself, it is very immanent in itself, but it serves as a kind of an opening through which one can link to transcendent. So it's a channel that connects finite to the infinite. And then another is, it makes unknown and inaccessible and something that one yearns for accessible to the person without exhausting the transcendent. Transcendent stays there, but it just allows it to view into that. Because in Jung sees it differently. Jung says that for him, the self is the God image inside the psyche. Symbol has multiple meanings, and it also operates very subjectively as compared to sign. Sign is more like it is objective and it has one static meaning. And the most important aspect, which I will link with the Quran, is that another book I would recommend is to any student of religious sciences is 1927 Rudolf Otto's. It is called The Idea of the Holy. There is no book like that, especially in Western tradition. I have at least not come across a book like that. It develops the idea of holy, and God essentially is holy. He's Qudus. And what Otto says, there is this category of numinous or numina, the holiness or the sacredness. And when a human agent interacts with that numinous, the immediate feeling or immediate experience that evokes in human is et mysterium tremendum fascinans. It is mysterious, it is overpowering, but it is at the same time tremendous. So it is different from fear, because fear is repulsive and numinous is attractive. It has a quality of jazb. It brings it closer, but at the same time, it is very full of awe. It humbles an individual. So symbol has to have that. And God says, Subhanahu wa ta'ala, in Quran says, actually the whole universe is a symbol of God. And every object in this universe is symbol of God, but depends upon when it opens for the Salik. And when Salik is looking at the symbol, this structure of the symbol vanishes. He's actually looking at God directly, to the ayn of his qalb, to the ayn of his heart. So today I think we should end here. I would like to talk about next time, someday, if we were interested. I would specifically wanted to focus on how Ibn Arabi's school, because most of the people here know Ibn Arabi, but I wanted to focus upon how it is different from pantheism and incarnationism. Two objections that have been leveled against Ibn Arabi, hulul and ittihad. And I will try to demonstrate that it is neither hulul nor ittihad, but closer to panentheism. Something like Ramanuja. I also wanted to draw parallels between not just parallels but also differences between Advaita Vedanta and Ibn Arabi. And differences are more important because lately whole discussions have been kind of converging to a point and showing what are the similitudes. And there are major differences between Advaita school and Ibn Arabi. Like in Advaita, the world is unreal. In Ibn Arabi, world is tajalli, it is very real, but it is existing at a certain scale. In Ibn Arabi, the idea of scale is very important. So inshallah, let's see if Allah wills, if God wills, next time we'll take.
Inshallah, yes. Thank you very much, Shoaib. You and I will talk about the possibilities and schedule and times and dates and topics over the next few weeks. So thank you very much. You have an amazing capacity for speaking from the heart, as well as remembering so much historical information, people's names and what their specialties are. This is amazing. I haven't, you're saying that without even looking at reading. So that's incredible. So thank you very, very much for that. So I'm going to open the floor. I have some comments or question I can ask, but I would rather allow others first. If anyone likes to make any comments or ask questions or engage with you, please go ahead. If anyone wants to speak, you may either just speak, or if you feel like putting your hands up first or clicking on the hands up, it's up to you. Yes, Professor Yusuf Amin, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
First of all, I share the appreciation which Mr. Frank has expressed regarding your talk, and may Allah accept your and our efforts in the path. It is indeed a very comprehensive survey, and there is very little to find fault with it. And there are some new points also, such as the special stress on reason by some of the akhlaf of Ibn Arabi, things like that. They are new accents. I won't say new points, but new accents, new stresses, which I have learned from this talk. I just want to mention two general issues, perspectival issues, which pertain not only to your talk and responses, but also to other discussions in this area. The first is that we should make a thorough study of Shah Waliullah to develop our framework. Because in his Al-Budur al-Bazigha, which is his dedicated book to philosophy, he has wonderfully integrated conceptual knowledge and ethical purification with intellection, and with intellection of both the types, the usual intellection and the high intellection of the Ishraqis, etc. So there is a tremendous, very demystified synthesis in Shah Waliullah's Al-Budur al-Bazigha. Even Nasr has pointed out that the synthesis brought about by Mullah Sadra was taken ahead by Shah Waliullah. But Shah Waliullah made, it seems to me, that Shah Waliullah made some very original additions to that synthesis. So this is one thing. The second thing is that when dealing with particularly the Hindu tradition, we have to remember that the Hindu tradition does not have that much benefit of being constantly understood correctly and transmitted correctly down the ages as the Islamic tradition. There is a lot of misunderstanding of Hindu tradition. So we have to be careful that whatever comments we are making about Hindu tradition, we should first of all cite our source. What is our source of the Hindu tradition? And then we should make it tentative. For instance, Ananda Kumar Swami has commented on Radha Krishnan, who is considered to be the greatest exponent of Hindu tradition in the contemporary times, and he has said that he is not an exponent of Hindu tradition, but rather a more modern Western understanding of Hindu tradition. So when a person of the caliber of Radha Krishnan is grossly inadequate to the Hindu tradition, we can appreciate that what would be the case with other exponents. I had the good fortune of attending a conference in Bangalore where the chief guest was a Hindu Swami, and he said that according to Vedanta, the world is at a particular level real. And he said that you tell it on my authority. I'm giving, unfortunately, I'm not able to recall his name. He said, you can tell it on my authority. He was a high-ranking sage or exponent of Hinduism. So he said, you can tell it on my authority that according to Vedanta, the world has a reality of its own level. So these are the only two things which I want to point out. That is, firstly, we should make a thorough study of Shah Waliullah, not only his Hujjatullah al-Baligha, magnum opus, but also Al-Budur al-Bazigha, which is a dedicated book to philosophy. So we will get a very good integrative framework, both mainly epistemologically, but also to an extent ontologically. So this is one thing. And the second thing is that we have to be very careful about quoting Hindu tradition, our sources, and still we should keep our propositions tentative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Yusuf Amin, for your comments. Shoaib, do you like to respond to any of that? Or?
Yes. Yusuf Saab, thank you. I really appreciate. It's an honor to hear from you. But I would like to make 2 points. One, actually, the first Sunday when this discussion was supposed to happen, as I already expressed my uzur, I am not used to public speaking. This is the second time I'm speaking in public. So my time management is also very bad. I realize that. But this was actually supposed to focus on the main points of Ibn Arabi, and then how Sheikh Ahmad Sirhandi Mujaddid al-Afsani kind of develops his critique of Ibn Arabi, and then how eventually Shah Waliullah Muhaddis Dahlevi Rahimullah, how he integrates and tries to show it as a linguistic difference fundamentally, while commenting that both are finally saying the same thing. In my humble reading, I feel then Shah Waliullah is leaning more towards Wujudi rather than Shuhudi. You may correct me if I'm wrong.
You are right.
Yes, and thank you. And another thing is that I would not say unfortunately, everything happens fortunately. Alhamdulillah, this discussion never reached to that point where we engaged with Shah Waliullah in whatsoever limited capacity I could. Thank you for your comments, and inshallah, I will try to go through Shah Waliullah again. And point taken. Another thing about Indian tradition is that I did not engage with Indian tradition as such, although I have many years of engagement with Indian tradition. I would not say Hindu tradition, because this term gets kind of hijacked. It gets on with the religious connotation. In Indian tradition, my background has been actually philosophically, not, my degree is not philosophy, but I have studied philosophy throughout. I was actually only invoking epistemological categories in Indian tradition. So, sir, when you mentioned Vedanta, actually, and that Swamiji said that you can quote on my authorities, world is real. Vedanta is composed of 3 schools actually. One is Advaita, another is Dvaita, another is Visistha Advaita. So, in one school, world is real. In another school, in Advaita Vedanta, there's absolutely no doubt that world is unreal. The whole emphasis, if we take world as real in Advaita, the whole theory of Maya becomes invalid, sir. So in Advaita, Gaudapada onwards, Gaudapada is regarded as one of the seminal sources of Adi Shankara, first Shankaracharya. The focus is actually on illusoriness of the world. And they use this example of rope and snake. It is replete there, this example. When I was quoting, I was primarily quoting from Viveka Chudamani. Viveka Chudamani is a text which has been, there's a debate about that. I agree with the point that there is a transmission thing, there is an issue with transmission as Islamic tradition has maintained the institution of transmission. It is exceptional. I think hardly, particularly in the field of hadith, there's hardly any parallel. But there still are texts available which have been written and which have been preserved. Although there has been disagreement about the authorship of those texts, but whether they belong to certain school of thought, that is out of question. Viveka Chudamani actually belongs to Advaita Vedanta. And I was not trying to delve in that school. I was actually just trying to invoke certain epistemological categories as to make the point, sir. Actually, lately, because of perennialist influence, there has been, and particularly in this brilliant work, Raza Shah Kazmi's Path to Transcendence, there has been attempt to show how both or three or four traditions are actually saying the same thing. I was actually saying that even though there are similarities, but there are also differences there. There are differences and they are bound to happen. So I would, that point well taken, but sir, I was quoting from a source. If anybody wants source, my number is here. I can always quote the source, because if I go into source, it will take even more time, sir. But sir, point well taken. I am really humbled. Jazakallah, sir. And I will continue to learn from you. Much thanks, sir.
Thank you, Shoaib.
Can I take 2 minutes further?
Yes, of course.
Sir,
please go ahead.
Sir, please.
Thank you very much. The speaker has appealed to Maya and the illusoriness to justify his stand that according to Advaita, the world is unreal. But here again, it can be said that our idea of real, because now we have to go into our own understanding in the contemporary period, what is the nature of our own understanding of terms. So, illusoriness which is born out of Maya, that illusoriness which is a correlative of Maya, in my opinion, that fully correlates with our idea of reality. So, the illusoriness due to Maya, I can say that it is a sort of reality as we contemporary people perceive reality. So it is very interesting. I have got a new point to think about from this exchange, that we have to bring in the contemporary understandings of the terms also in order to make things clear. That's all which I'd like to say, and again appreciate the presentation.
Thank you, Professor Yusuf. Does anyone else like to make any comments?
Make one comment? Can I just, if I'm permitted to make one comment?
Yes, please, Shoaib, yes.
Sir, Yusuf sir, actually my, whatever, because everybody is mutala is limited. In my mutala, whatever I came across, I think particularly in Advaita Vedanta and later Advaita Vedanta, the theory of epistemology is very well developed. And there is hierarchy of which experience is more valid. That is why the idea of subrating is very important in Advaita Vedanta. For instance, sir, in Advaita Vedanta, they talk about, there's a discussion about Shabd Praman. Shabd Praman is equivalent to testimony. So they take Shabd Praman. Shabd Praman would be equivalent to Shruti. Shruti is their revealed text. In classical Indian tradition, there is a differentiation between Shruti and Smriti. Shruti being the revealed text, but not in a sense which is present in Semitic religions. In Semitic religions, and a divine agency, whether there is in terms of tanazzulat, whether in terms of angel brings down, the word of God comes to a certain Nabi or Rasul who articulates and embodies that Wahi. In classical Hindu tradition, the word of God is eternal. It is eternal. Vedas are eternal there. And it is the rishis that come across in there. So in Hinduism, the direction is going up. And you reach a certain level, you hear the Vedas. In Semitic religions, the direction is downwards. In terms of Tanzil, Quran uses this term in my humble understanding. There, Shruti is revealed text, and Simriti is kind of an interpretation. It's not revealed. Shankaracharya, Adi Shankara, one of his, one thing we are certain of is that about one book that everybody is certain is there is consensus is his Bhashya, Brahma Bhashya, which is his commentary on Brahma Sutras. He develops a theory of interpretation. So he makes a very subtle point there. In Advaita Vedanta tradition, the category of Anubhava, experience, will always be higher than Advaita Vedanta tradition, higher than Shruti. So not only it validates Shruti, but also holds a higher position. And it is called Aparaksha Jnana there. Aparaksha Jnana means one-on-one witnessing of the subject-object witnessing. And Anubhava will hold higher category. And then their Shabd Praman hold a certain level, the testimony. But there are other means. There, what I mean to say, I can go into the depth and how they see Anumana and they see Shabda Pramana and Aparaksha Jnana. Here, the theory of epistemology is very well developed. In my opinion, why it was very well developed was because Advaita Vedanta, like any other school, was contesting as a mainstream view of Sanatan or Hinduism or Indian tradition. At the same time, it was contesting Buddhists. At the same time, later on, it had to contest Dvaitas, Ramanujacharya, Madhavacharya. At the same time, it was also contesting, it had to contest Jainas and Buddhists. And more importantly, it had to contest Nyaya philosophers. So Nyaya philosophers are logicians, which is one of the darshanas. There are darshanas, ways of seeing. So one of the darshanas is Nyaya, and Nyaya people had actually extensively developed their logical and epistemological and linguistic categories. Very clear definitions if you read any Nyaya text. So while competing and contesting in the mainstream milieu, Advaita Vedantins had to come up with definitions. So it was the need of the hour that they came up with more developed epistemological systems. I couldn't come across till now, I don't know if I can in future, more clearer epistemological categories or proper epistemological theories that have been built within Islamic discourse particularly, or even Christianity doesn't have. Judaism to a certain extent, the Indian tradition has that, but there is more focus on epistemological categories.
Here again, Shah Waliullah may help because he has developed quite clarified idea of epistemology, particularly in Al-Budur al-Bazigha.
Okay,
and
sir.
maybe in some of his other books also, which I have not read. I have read Al-Budur al-Bazigha. So there he has developed the epistemology. And I would just refer to one very eminent professor of Islamic Studies department in Aligarh Muslim University, who is now not with us. He has passed away. I don't want to mention his name because that may be what he did not intend, but he has made a remark that all of us Muslims, particularly after Ibn Arabi, all of us Muslims, whatever may be our avowals or disavowals, we are all Wahdatul Wujudi. So this shows the great and providential and divine mediumhood of Ibn Arabi in bringing down the scheme of Wahdatul Wujud to make Islam and reality and truth very, very comprehensible.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Professor
you, sir.
Yusuf.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to comment on the topic that both of you are discussing. I will do it a little bit from Ibn Arabi's perspective as well. You, Shoaib, mentioned how Ibn Arabi talks about the philosophical and the experiential or the heart aspect or spiritual. And you gave the example of al-hal, which is temporary state, and then al-maqam, which is a more longer-term permanent stage, which this is part of the experiential. But I just want to say that human beings haven't got the capacity to experience what they haven't got the capacity to experience. And we have to take that into account with respect. We have to respect human beings who don't know, because it's not their fault. So we should really give that a lot of thought, that we can't argue with them and expect them, like expecting a child to understand what a PhD person can understand, and it's not their fault. And also the fact that philosophy, I mean, Ibn Arabi downgrades philosophy when he compares it with his own experience, of course, because his own experience is got the certainty of reality that he sees directly. But at the same time, he uses philosophy as a language to express his experience to other people. Without this philosophy methodology, there is no way we can share our experiences with each other. We can't just say, I'm experiencing it all, I know what it's about, and just be quiet and say nothing, because the other people have no idea what we are experiencing in our hearts. So philosophy is essential in that sense, that we have to use it, even if we use it as a tool, as a communication to express, so we can hear the other person express back. But I think it's very important to put both of these in perspective, that there are many grades of perspectives, like you said, hal and state or maqam, but there are many maqams. And whether there's 10 or 20 or 100 or whatever, there's definitely many. And it's not anyone's fault to be not at the top. We are all somewhere. None of us are at the bottom. If we are at the very bottom, we wouldn't be here in a meeting like this. And we are certainly not at the top either, because also if we are at the very top, maybe we wouldn't be here either. So we must all be somewhere in between, whether we are 10, 20, 30, 50, 70, 90%, doesn't matter. So what shall we do? Are we going to throw at each other what we know and teach each other, or are we going to be humble and learn so we can all learn and grow together? So this is really where humility becomes essential for the genuine seeker to want to develop. So I think it's very important that we respect both philosophical and experiential, and respect that there are different stages, and while there are levels of them, they're not superior or inferior to each other any more than the child is inferior to an adult. The child in many ways is more beautiful than any adult. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you for standing up for man. Somebody has to stand up for man.
Well, this is the reality, isn't it? Really, it's
on a lighter note, I mean.
Yeah.
I am reminded of this movie called Devil's Advocate.
Yeah.
So on a lighter note, so in that, the character of Satan, which is played by Al Pacino, he asks him, "Who are you?" He says, "I am the fan of the man." Just a second. So yes, I would agree. This is very beautifully put, and I think you also brought it last time. Also, we talked about it, and I think it provides a good way to humble oneself without losing confidence in oneself.
Yes.
And at the same time being responsible for oneself and for around people and whatsoever one finds around.
Excellent.
So thank you, Frank.
Yes, excellent.
Can I have a comment?
I think you
Can I
have
have
to
a
take.
comment?
Yes, please.
Can I have? Yes, actually, this Shah Waliullah Dehelvi, I was recently reading, he has this something called Lataif. So he categorizes the self, maybe the inner self in terms of sir, intellect, ruh,
Akhfa,
and
Sir, Akhfa,
and other.
Talab.
So how do you see? There's also something called ayani sabita into maybe in Ibn Arabi's terminology. So how do you how can what I should say if there can be relation in that sense? And can we connect it with, for example, in recent discourses in consciousness studies, where sometimes that the self, the ideation of self in terms of non-reflective uh, uh, appreciation of self, which will maybe dissolve these binaries of the other, matlab, between the dualities which you are basically talking. Maybe I'm not able to properly formulate. So the dualities which are there maybe in Advait philosophy and these discourses of Ayani Sabita and these different categories of how maybe this Shah Waliullah try to maybe in the subcategory of noumena he's trying of sir, akal, nafs, kalb, ruh, these terms. Maybe if you can say something.
This is, are you posing this to me, Sohail?
No, I'm saying generally, whatever you want to say, I'm connecting
You,
it. I'm not posing any question, but it's like maybe different readings.
I think these Lataif are not unique to Shah Waliullah. Maybe Yusuf Saab can correct me. I think they are generally used within the Naqshbandi framework, where they employ. I have interesting parallels.
In
The
fact, it is
location of the.
in fact it
Sir,
is considered to in fact it is considered to be for the first time given to Mujaddid al-Fisani, the scheme of Lataif, and we can correlate it with the chakras of yoga. And the Ayane Sabit are a completely different set. They are archetypes.
I have, Suhail, I will send you an image which I have captured in my phone. I don't know how to share the screen. I'm bad. There's an image from Jaina cosmology which shows certain points in the body. It's actually, and then I'll show you another image which is talking about the Lataif. I think it's Lataif is Sitta, if I am not wrong. And those Lataif also have colors. They are actually pointers in physiological body. They symbolically expressed. And sometimes they are also associated with a certain maqam. And that maqam is associated with a certain Nabi or Rasul. And as Yusuf sir already said, it is very popular in Naqshbandiya. Naqshbandiya have their own extensive vocabulary in their suluk, like they have Baz, Gasht, Hosh Dar Dam, Nazar Dar Qalab, Khalwat Dar Anjuman. And I would rather extend these are actually even present in Khwaja Gan. Khwaja Gan means earlier Naqshbandis who were originally this kind of suluk developed around in Uzbekistan. And one of the leading figures there was Abdul Khali Gajidwani, who is in Silsilatul Zahab, the golden chain of Naqshbandiya, is one of the leading giants. From there, we are certain of Naqshbandiya school, although the Sufi lineages tend to include in their suluk earlier figures also, which is very skeptical. Like you will see in Sufi chains, you will see Habibi Ajmi, Dawood Tai, Junaidi Baghdadi, Bayezid. Bayezid is, for instance, present in Naqshbandi Silsila. And one of the Naqshbandi practices is to remember the whole chain every morning when they do spiritual practices. So Bayezid, when we look at Bayezid, we don't see them belonging to any Silsila. Anyways, the point is, the Lataif is something different. Ayan Sabita is something different. As Yusuf Saab rightly said, Lataif is more close to yogic practice. In this regard, I would recommend a brilliant book. It is by this Carl. I'll send you that book. It has shown kind of parallels of the between yoga philosophy and very famous author, yoga philosophy and mysticism and mystical discourses that were present particularly during Mughal India. and it trying to establish the synonymity. Ayan Sabita is permanent archetype. So generally, permanent. It is unmanifested. What do you call that? They are madum. Do you understand madum?
Yes, yes, Mawdum and Mawjud. Yes, Mawdum, Mawjud.
Yeah,
Yes.
madum. They are not mojud. They are madum. They are inside God's knowledge, and they are present eternally. They are not yet mojud. They are. That is why ayan is sabita. Ayn means eye. Sabita means before. So they are permanent categories inside God's knowledge, and they do not have possessed wujud yet. Do you get it?
Yes, yes. So I have one small point. The question is the physicalistic view of consciousness, which is prevalent from people from artificial intelligence and sciences, particularly neurosciences. So how do you, if you want to contest or if you want to have how do you, is the way you can relate it there? The physicalistic view of consciousness, where consciousness is only material only. So this thing relating this reality to some higher reality or relating the reality of your nafs with some higher reality or God or the existence of this wujud means existence of Allah is before wujud. It's a reality.
No.
So this modern day understanding of physicalistic view of consciousness, basically, how do you see this? How can you relate it with your this Veda? This Ibn Arabi's understanding of or your general religious understanding of things.
I
Before
think.
I'll
Sorry, go ahead,
proceed,
Shoaib.
before I'll proceed to answer that, I will make one important point about ayan sabita, because these are tricky questions. Ayan sabitas, one of the essential characterization about ayan sabita is that they are not ontological in nature. They are epistemological in nature. But for God, they are epistemological in nature, not ontological in nature. They have not yet taken the wujud. Now coming to, I know what you are referring to. We usually have this debate, is explaining consciousness in terms of the biological activity that happens primarily inside the brain and the extension itself. There has been a lot of advances in neurotheology. There is absolutely no doubt about it. That lot of advances in neurotheology have taken place, and both they are concomitant and concurrent with the uh, taking on board of entheogenic experiences. I apologize if I am using very abstruse terms. Entheogenic experiences means in certain traditional settings, like Amazon, like they use this traditionally. They use this medicine called ayahuasca. Now, anybody would generally dismiss it as a drug, but for them, for the Amazon tribes, it's not drug. It is the way. It's a potion they take in order to connect to divine. It's a very shamanistic way of doing things. But now it's very popular. And it is analogy is also found in what we call ibogaine in Gabon. And increasing studies are being dedicated towards understanding. And what they have deduced, what scientific approach has deduced is that essential to this experience is a molecule. I'm using a very physicalistic way of describing. It's called DMT, dimethyl tryptamine. And when we have done MRI of people who were undergoing mystical or spiritual experiences, same areas of brain have been lit under MRI, which were lit under the influence of, say, taking entheogens. Entheo means inside, gen means God. So people are discovering God inside, so to say. They connect to other realms of existence and talk about altered consciousness. And mystical consciousness in certain ways is an altered consciousness. But there's a one point here. When you are saying consciousness studies itself doesn't have a coherent or a one single viewpoint. There are multiple viewpoints available. So we have not, in scientific field, we have not been able to identify one single point where we will say this is the model for consciousness from scientific perspective. There are alternative ways available. Whereas here in mystical studies, there is proper theory available there. I think it is too early to create one-on-one mapping unless, because neurotheology subject is developing. There are just 3 books written or 4 books written over neurotheology till now. So it is developing, the field is developing.
Yes.
I am sorry, the kids. Yeah. So it is developing. I don't think it would be proper to map one-on-one, and it is, I think, beyond the scope of this discussion. Someday, maybe together over a cup of tea, I can put my.
I think
I
this is
would-
a. Sorry, go ahead, Yusuf.
Sorry for
No
thwarting
problem.
you.
No, you're excited and like I am, so go ahead.
Thank you. So, the physiological or physicalist level of consciousness is only a partial and lower expression of the overall consciousness. I think this perspectival formulation would be closer to reality. And one proof for it is that consciousness created by physical means such as drugs, etc., it never has that complete dimensions of sacredness which we find when a correlated consciousness is invoked from the higher means. So that is associated with sacredness, sanctity, whereas consciousness invoked by physicalist means is, to my knowledge, is not associated with sanctity. So this, to my mind, is a proof that the physicalist level of consciousness is a lower and limited part of the overall consciousness.
Thank you.
Yusuf
Yes,
Saab, can I respond, Frank, to just
Yes.
a line?
yes, please.
Yusuf Saab, I think respectfully, I would disagree with this approach, because this approach was taken by R.C. Zehner. It's a very old approach in which Zehner, in his book, it's called Mysticism, Sacred Profane, and also by Aldous Huxley. Huxley in his Doors to Perception. So both are talking about, they are roughly contained in that era of West when there was an increased access to particularly one particular drug, LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide. And they kind of, Zehner goes on to, because they have a very Orientalist way of doing things. Zehner eventually culminates his argument, as does Aldous Huxley under his. Aldous Huxley took mescaline, and he has noted those experiences in a small book called Doors to Perception. And that led him to being a proto-perennialist. There's another book called Perennial Philosophy, in which he has kind of attempted to show how all religions at their core are same. It's a proto-perennialist. It's yet anticipating somebody like Fritjof Schoen or Houston Smith, Kumaraswamy, or Titus Burkhardt, etc. Latest developments in basically in transdisciplinary studies, particularly in religious anthropology, have demonstrated that the use of these potions, particularly ayahuasca and ibogaine, in their original setting, evokes a sense of same sacred category. For them, it evokes a same sense of category, because to say and to categorize somebody's experience as not sacred, especially because these are very individualistic and insular settings in which these medicines have been used. I think it would not be doing justice. It would be kind of creating a universalist model for mysticism and altered state of consciousness and being dismissive towards another.
No, I agree with what you have said later, but there it joins with my point that there it is not only a physical input, but there is a context also. They take it with certain traditional perspective. So that context supplies the rest of the things. And so
Yes,
we
sir, I
see,
agree.
so we can see sanctity, but against it is a very ambivalent thing. At least that much we have to say. It's quite ambivalent. There may be sanctity, there may not be sanctity. There may be something diabolical also, if it is mainly based upon drugs. If it is mainly based upon drugs, but drugs taken in a traditional context can be instrumental in sanctity. That I agree. But again, it is not only physical. That's the point. It is not only physiological or physical. There is a higher context with it.
Yes, sir, I agree. Actually, sir, just to add, if anybody is interested in this field, there is a professor of Jerusalem University called Benny Shannon. Benny Shannon has written a very interesting paper about the experience of Moses alayhi salatu wasalam on Tur. And he has attempted to describe the whole experience, although not necessarily that I agree with him. But what I'm trying to put across is that how these fields of inquiry are emerging and trying to inform the traditional understandings of certain historical episodes. So he says in that paper that in Middle East, a particular entheogen was used a lot, and it's called Peganum harmala. Peganum harmala, he says it is actually what Moses ﷺ witnessed, is from University of, is arguing that is actually an entheogenic experience. And so is, more interestingly, so is Haoma or Soma. Soma in Vedic setting, Haoma in Zoroastrian setting. There was some kind of herb or some kind of, I don't want to use drug, it's very demeaning, some kind of potion that was used in religious ceremonies. More interestingly, Jesus alayhi salatu wasalam, because Jesus is actually called Messiah in two traditions. Christianity and Islam uphold him as Masih ibn Maryam. Masih translates as somebody who is massaged, masah, like we do. So Hebrew roots are masah, one who is massaged. And because anointed one, the proper translation is anointed one. And Jesus was anointed one, because in one episode in Bible, there is Magdalena, Mary Magdalena. She is washing the feet of Jesus. This used to be, anointment used to be of the Davidic line kings. In traditional Judaism, they used to, when they used to announce somebody as king, they used to massage his legs with certain oil. Now we know that one of the things that holy oil contained was cannabis. We have actually discovered there's an archaeological evidence that for that oil that was used to massage those Davidic line kings, one of the things among the 7 herbs, frankincense, myrrh, one of them was cannabis, like bhang, that is used. So I think there is an opening up of a lot of things to be researched in this matter.
Not only opening up, there is a crypto materialism also behind it. So we have to be wary of that. We have to be careful of that. That whether it is a valid association of material things, or it is an attempt to materialize and reduce essentially spiritual and divine phenomena into material ones. So we have to be very careful.
Point well taken, sir. Thank you.
Can I just look at it from another perspective? If we look at Islam, for example, the highest value is in Islam is La ilaha illallah, which means there is nothing but him. Then comes to Ibn Arabi, he actually also almost saying the same thing in Wahdat al-Wujud. Wahdat al-Wujud means also that's all there is. Wujood is Wujood of everything. Nothing else exists outside of Wujood. And in English, people use the word consciousness, and in other traditions. And I think Ibn Arabi uses the idea of the absolute and the relative, because Ibn Arabi talks about manifestation. So the absolute manifests. When it manifests, it's like it gets created, if you like. It's like the physical is a creation, and as a creation, it's a manifestation of the same absolute. So the physical is not separate anymore, like than a piece of gold manifests in a ring. The ring is still the same gold, so there's no separation as such. It's still one whole thing. And really, this is why Ibn Arabi talks about al-a'yan al-thabita. I think the a'yan al-thabita means, if you look at it from Allah's perspective or God's perspective, of the absolute perspective, it's the very first thing that manifests from the absolute, because the absolute is not relative. It doesn't change. It's ever the same. So the very first thing that gets manifested into the relative is the highest relative, and that doesn't change because it is like a barzakh. It's on the way in between. It's like in between the absolute and the relative. So as it manifests and the further it goes into the levels of manifestation, the more gross it becomes. And the physical is the more gross, if you like, the more gross. So if we look at it in the other way around, like Suhail started talking about lataif, in English we can say the word lataif means subtleties. So when something is latif, we say it's subtle. Subtle means it's not gross. It's gross, less gross becomes more subtle, less gross, more subtle. So that means we become capable of seeing what we couldn't see before. On the gross level, we can only see what the eyes and nose and feelings and all that the senses allow us to see on the physical level. But we can't see other things which are there. So you have to be able to see more subtle capacity to be able to see it. And this is why spiritual development is best actually measured in the capacity of seeing more and more subtleties. So one develops spiritually by becoming more and more and more and more and more and more subtle until he gets the most subtle, which is as close as possible, if you like, to the ayan thabita, which in turn they say one transcends. Transcend means one becomes the absolute, which is beyond the relative. So it's all concepts, and we have to be careful with words and concepts. It's really trying to express something which is really inexpressible. We can never express God. We can never express Allah. We can never express consciousness in words, even though we try to use words to point to it. And we hope that when we use the right words, somebody hears it, and that will entice him to recognize the experience within himself, as opposed to just taking on a theory to remember and believe in.
It will evoke in him the same thing.
Evoke in him, exactly. Evoke the experience within him, ideally. And that even cannot be done by another person, because it depends on the person themselves and their readiness to receive and their capacity to receive. So it needs both. Even grace is always available for everyone, but not everybody gets that grace because they haven't got the capacity to receive it or the interest in absorbing it and saying yes. And it's not their fault either. It's just part of the way we need time to develop and move forward. So
I'm getting bolder and just taking one or 2 minutes more. We have to bring in the afterlife also, because most of our talk is with the premise that we have to gain these abilities in this life. Whereas Islamic tradition, and I think other traditions also make it clear that we have a certain development in this life. We have a certain development in this life, which may not be very complete. So we may not be what is called in Vedantic terms, Jivan Mukta. We may not be Jivan Mukta. We may not get Mukti in this life, but in later life we'll get it. In Hinduism, in the next rebirth, and in Islam, by the elevation of a person in paradise, in heaven, the things become the things become evident and expressed. So this is also very important, that we should always have that great solace of afterlife. If we do not experience, if we do not realize in this world, we should not be heartbroken. We should go on trying to develop. And inshallah, by God's grace, in the next life, we will have an expression of whatever maqam we have achieved in this life, which has not been translated into hal for certain reasons. And here again, an interesting point, that according to Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi, sometimes the makeup of the psyche is such that a person's hal is not, that a person's maqam is not able to translate into its hal because of the simple things of the harshness of the personality. So very small things may be behind the non-expression of maqam into hal in this life. And of course, having a lower maqam, that of course is the main differentiator. So we should have this solace that so it is very important to always keep afterlife as a parallel framework.
Yeah, we can do that. But at the moment, all we have is the life that we have now. So we want to do the best we can at the present moment with the life that we have. And hopefully when the future comes, we will also be in our present moment.
Excellent.
All right, I think we have gone way too far. I don't know whether I should ask for more questions, but I think people will excuse me if I say maybe we should wrap it up. Unless somebody has a question they're dying to ask and they will die if they don't ask it, please go ahead and ask that question if it's so important. Otherwise, I'd like to wrap it up. Okay, thank you very, very much. Thank you, Shoaib, for a beautiful, engaging talk. And it looks like we have to bring you back again so we can continue this conversation, because this conversation is not merely for scholars, it's for everybody who's a human being who's developing. We will definitely have a scholar, as a Professor Faris Gulzar, talk to us next month about dialectic of love in Ibn Arabi's thought. So it's something that I think we would look forward to. So thank you again very much, everyone, and thank you for your patience and staying for way beyond 2 hours. We lost a few people, but that's understandable. We stretched them too much. So thank you very much, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu
Wa alaikum
Thank you.
assalam.
alaikum.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.